I really did not want to make this video, but here we are on the second part of 2026, a year that was supposed to be gigantic for fighting games, full of new titles that were very exciting and based on many very popular intellectual properties like League of Legends, right, with 2XKO, Invincible FighterZ, also Marvel Tōkon, and even Avatar Legends, the fighting game. And sadly, a lot of these titles had or are having a ton of issues and problems. So for example, right, 2XKO is officially shutting down, no more support for the game, so no new characters, no more updates. It's essentially over, and if you want to play 2XKO, you can do it. The servers are still gonna be up, but sadly there is no way to keep updating the game unless, you know, the community finds a way to do it through mods and their own kind of like offline client that maybe could happen in the future if that is, you know, possible. Then the case of Invincible, right, Invincible FighterZ actually laid off I think 70 or 80% of their team behind the game, just like the case with 2XKO earlier this year, and the game obviously was not the gigantic hit that an IP like Invincible could be, since it is so big, especially in the United States. Invincible is one of the most popular, you know, comic books and also shows in the West and in the US. And then finally we have the case of Marvel Tōkon, that even though it's not necessarily having the worst launch of all time, the version for PC or the PC port of Marvel Tōkon is an absolute disaster. Even the developers have actually acknowledged that it's gonna be incredibly hard to recover from this kind of like, you know, I would say crisis with the launch on PC, and that is gonna be very, very hard to get, you know, players another opportunity to try the game out and not just drop it forever. And essentially Marvel Tōkon is losing on a lot of players and a big significant part of the player base that is not gonna engage with the game, because the PC version of Marvel Tōkon is actually a disaster. But to be completely honest with you, the reason why I'm making this video is not because I want to drama farm, you know, surrounding the bad news connected to all these games. It's actually because I want to discuss with you, since you're a viewer, right, you're watching this video, so you're probably a fan of fighting games just like me. I want to discuss with you the big picture. What does all of this stuff actually mean for the future of fighting games as a genre? And for that, I want to give perspective on how exactly are we here. Why is it that a year like 2026 actually has 4 different fighting games coming out in the same year, and how maybe the quote-unquote failure of these titles could have consequences for the upcoming years when it comes to other fighting games as well. So the first point to understand, like I said again, how it is it exactly that we are in 2026 and we're getting 4 different fighting games in the same year, when we always say online, or we see people saying online, that fighting games are niche. These are games that don't sell well. Why are we appealing to the casual audience if they never stick with these games? And the real reason is that at the end of the day, fighting games are not niche by definition. And all of these gigantic titles that we have gotten this year, and also other ones from the last few years, are connected to the success of older games that were absolutely gigantic, like for example Dragon Ball FighterZ. Why do you think that we're getting Invincible FighterZ and Marvel Tōkon, or even Avatar Legends, which are old games based on external IPs? The same with, you know, 2XKO, even though that is a much older project. And it is because Dragon Ball FighterZ was arguably the biggest fighting game of the decade, and it sold better than some single player games, it sold better than some arena fighters. It was a tremendous success. So many publishers, developers, and companies over the last decade have been trying to imitate the success of a game like dbfz, and for them, you know, that meant having a big external IP and a game that maybe had the opportunity to sell very well. At the same time, why do you think that we're getting new entries for very old legacy 3D fighting games like Virtua Fighter and also Dead or Alive? Because of the gigantic success that Tekken 7 was. Tekken 7 was also one of the most successful fighting games in the last decade. It sold a ton of copies. And at the end of the day, even if you have that opinion that fighting games, you know, are always niche by definition, that they are never going to attract a casual audience, which is factually not true, by the way, just based on statistics. At the end of the day, fighting games, when they do well, they can make you earn a lot of money, because fighting games work like a live service game. Even if they're not free-to-play games, they sell you new characters every single year, and by the end, you know, of the support of a fighting game with 4 or 5 years of DLC, somebody can actually spend, you know, $300 to $400 on the full package of the base game and every single season of DLC, plus maybe some cosmetics if they buy all of that when it actually comes out. And of course, some people grab all of that stuff with discount, but still, it can be very profitable if you actually get a fighting game to be big and sell a lot of copies and a lot of DLC, even more profitable than other genres of video games. So at the end of the day, that is why we're getting so many different fighting games in the last few years, because there has been evidence that the genre can actually be big and it can be a big success, but people have not been able to replicate that formula consistently. I even forgot to mention Mortal Kombat, man, you know, MKX, MK11, also Mortal Kombat 1. Very successful games. Of course, MK11 I think was the biggest one, but by this point in time, you know, Mortal Kombat sells almost like a FIFA game, you know, or like an EA sports game. It is very popular. People buy Mortal Kombat just like buying a God of War. It's almost like they buy an action game more than a fighting game. It has essentially transcended, you know, kind of like the fighting genre by this point, and it has a much bigger audience than just other fighting games, you know, in the same kind of like market. But what is gonna happen, you know, moving forward, taking into consideration that many titles have not been able to replicate the success of older games, and arguably the only new gen fighting game that is doing really well is actually Street Fighter 6 and maybe also Tekken 8, but Tekken 8 has been also a bit shaky as a title. What does it actually mean for the future of fighting games as a genre in the video game industry? So the first thing to understand, in my opinion, after having, you know, that kind of like perspective of why fighting games over the last few years have become bigger, or why we have so many new games every single year, is that from, you know, maybe 2027 or 2028 onwards, we are highly likely not gonna get that many new fighting games every single year. I think that the pacing of new fighting games is going to slow down. Maybe we're gonna get like one game a year max, I would say, but it also depends, you know, of all the projects that were already happening before this couple of years and all the issues with new fighting games. For example, Virtua Fighter Crossroads and Dead or Alive 7 have probably been on development before even like 2024 or 2023 is when they started, so they didn't even see all of this shakeup after Street Fighter 6 and Mortal Kombat 1 when it comes to maybe other titles not doing that well or not meeting the financial expectations, at least, you know, when compared to games like 2X Scale, right? Or maybe even Invincible vs. that was not maybe the biggest hit in the world. And I think that there is a decent chance that moving forward, we're gonna get maybe one new fighting game every year or one every 2 years, because many investors or people that are behind the scenes, like in the industry level, right? They are not going to trust fighting games as a genre overall, at least not as much after, you know, they started to receive pitches on like, you know, 2018, 2019, 2020, after the gigantic success of games like dbfz, like Tekken 7, like Street Fighter 6 after, you know, 2023 and stuff like that. So I would argue that there is a decent chance that the pacing of all these games is going to calm down, and even though we're gonna still, you know, get new games, it might not be super or as crazy as it is right now. Then the second thing that I would expect moving forward, and this is actually positive when you actually think about it, is that with this, you know, lower pace of releases, hopefully what's going to happen is that developers or companies are going to, you know, develop consciousness around the fact that you cannot release fighting games that don't work. You need to have a fighting game that is very strong in the launch window of the game to actually do well. And it needs to be a robust title. You know, it needs to be like Street Fighter 6, a game that has good single player, great training mode, great tutorials, great graphics, a good roster, right? And it's overall kind of like just a good video game product to put your money on, and not only a good fighting game when it comes to its gameplay, because I don't think that gameplay really sells fighting games. By this point, it is very clear that that is not the case. What really sells your fighting game is just, you know, the world building, the single player content, and actually if it is not a good video game overall, just when it comes to the package of what you're putting your money into. So I would expect that maybe in the future, ideally, companies, developers, and publishers are going to be more aware that that is the type of game that they need to release to actually receive kind of like, you know, the financial response of games like dbfz and Tekken 7 that were so big, because by this point the standard is a Street Fighter 6. I would say that it's really actually interesting how, for example, so many of the newer games are trying to imitate the mechanics and the gameplay of a Street Fighter 6. It feels like almost every single new game that is 2D at least has some form of like drive impact or drive rush in the game, and it is very stupid. I think that it shows kind of like the ignorance behind the teams, you know, all the people that are behind these games when it comes to trying to understand what is exactly that makes this game successful. Because if you think that having some form of drive impact in your game is gonna make it do well, you really do not understand why Street Fighter 6 is a big game. I think that the gameplay mechanics or the systems of that game are far less important than all the package, you know, that the game brings you as a player and as a consumer when it comes to putting your money for the actual title and all the game modes and stuff that you can do within it. So I would expect, hopefully, you know, this is kind of like the positive side of the future of the genre, that please, developers, companies, publishers, actually develop consciousness around the idea that what makes a fighting game do well is if it is, you know, just a good video game and not only a good, you know, gameplay when it comes to the experience of the fighting game. And the other thing, obviously, is that the games actually need to work, okay? Marvel Tōkon, for example, is actually a great game. I think that overall, it has everything that you need. Like, the single player content of the game is great. There's a lot of stuff to do. Like, the game has a story mode for every single team, right? And it's very fun. The game also has like a roguelike with survival mode. And there is even like a game mode in the lobby. The lobbies are also amazing. But the game doesn't work on PC. Like, the game literally came out and it was an absolute mess on PC. And I think that that needs to stop happening also because in the world that we live in right now, you know, in the world of social media, everything moves really fast. So a lot of people, I would say, probably didn't buy the game at all because of all the buzz that they heard online. And literally from day one, the game received criticism, you know, in social media related to the problems of the game on PC and all the technical issues from the matchmaking. So if you have that word of mouth in the launch window of your fighting game, you're gonna have a lot of trouble. And at the end of the day, fighting games do not get a second chance. You know, fighting games are not like other video games. And this is kind of like more generalizable at this point by almost any video game out there. You cannot fumble the launch window of your game. It needs to work at launch. You know, if you're gonna sell something, actually sell something that works perfectly, that doesn't have any technical issues, and that it is a good package. I really hope, you know, that developers learn all of this, what has been going on, especially this year as well. And I just really want fighting games to do well. Like, at the end of the day, these games can be very successful, they are very fun, and I truly believe that fighting games are some of the best video games out there when it comes to what, you know, they give you for your money, especially when it is a good game like Street Fighter 6, right? They have so much replayability, they are so fun, there's so much to enjoy, and also to learn if you actually get more, you know, deep into the fighting game experience. But if you're gonna, you know, sell games that don't work, and also games that you cannot do anything on them, you know, like 2XKO, for example, I really enjoyed 2XKO when I played it, but there was nothing to do on the game. It was literally a net play simulator. Like, there was no single player, no content whatsoever. It would just jump online, play solo or play with a friend, and that is the entire thing that we're giving you, and maybe some $70 cosmetics that you can maybe buy if you have the money and you want to support the game. You cannot release games like in that state, you know, with technical issues or with a bad monetization system and with no content whatsoever. They are not going to do well. And I just really hope that that changes, you know, moving forward. We need games that actually work and games that have content for people to enjoy them and have fun. So I really just wanted to talk about all of this to give kind of like a bigger perspective, or just give the big picture of what's going on, what it could mean for the future, and also why are we here? Like, why exactly, you know, fighting games who, you know, are such a small niche, quote unquote, why are we getting so many new games? It's because they are not as small as you think, at least by the time, you know, that all these companies and developers probably receive a pitch after the success of many gigantic games like dbfz, like Tekken 7, because at that point in time, it seemed like really good business to actually think about how to make a successful fighting game, since they can be so profitable when you actually do them well. So yeah, thank you for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and see you on the next one. Take care.